G'day and welcome to another episode of Meet Adelaide. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're turning the tables. As you might know, I'm a candidate for South Ward in the Adelaide City Council, and so my friend George is joining me today to actually ask me a few questions about why I'm running, what motivates me, and what makes me tick. George is a former communications advisor to the Minister for Environment under David Spears. He's also the founder of the Adelaide Set, which is South Australia's largest youth platform. And he's also currently a communications and marketing advisor for coordinator for a national health clinic. So, George, thank you very much for coming on today and asking me a couple of questions.
No worries. Thanks for having me. And just to be clear, guys, I was communications officer in the Department for Environment and Water. You said communications advisor.
Oh, that's close enough.
It's a bit different. But yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your journey and how you got into politics.
Yeah.
And hearing a bit about your past, present, and future.
We haven't often sat down.
No, not really.
And had a long chat together.
No, normally on Discord. So
yeah, we're playing League of Legends or doing something nerdy. I'd just like to note that George is in Bronze 3 and I'm in Silver 2 on League of Legends. So
just barely there.
Thought I'd note that for posterity.
Yeah, barely hanging there.
Yeah.
But no, we're both nerds. Make that very clear. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, kind of our thing. But no, let's get into the politics. I want to hear about where it first started. So obviously most parts of life, the childhood is very important and makes you who you are today. So what part of your childhood got you intrigued into politics?
Yeah, that's probably true. A lot of your interests come from those early years. So I actually grew up in Canberra where I went to a French school. It was a full immersion French school. So I did everything in French, including English. I did English and French. And every Tuesday we'd have a spelling test, basically, and I would fail them. There was really no point in me showing up. I was going to get less than 0. They stopped marking it -20. So generally on a Tuesday, I would wag school and chuck a sickie on the way to work. And my mum actually was a security guard. Both of my parents were security guards at Parliament House in Canberra before I was born. And then mum used to work there in the stationery office. So I used to chuck a sickie. And the great thing about going to Parliament House when you're a kid having a sick day is they also had a PlayStation in the family room in the Senate. So I would go there and play, different games all day. And my mum used to realize maybe he's not that sick because I would go around, talk to all the different offices that have Ferrero Rochers or whatever. So I'd go and grab one of those and make my rounds and take an interest in the actual different offices. I didn't know who I was visiting, but that was the environment I was in. But my mum would feel a bit guilty every now and again. She'd make me go and sit in the Senate chamber and watch what they were doing. And as a 6-year-old kid, maybe 8, I was very bored out of my brain watching the proceeds of the Senate. But it seemed like a fair compromise to be playing computer games all day and sit in the Senate for a little bit. As the years went on until I was actually 15, 16, I did this for a long time. I started to see what the actual work that they were doing and began to understand it. And as I'd watch TV, at home, watch the news, and I could see, playback from Question Time or talking about the different bills that I'd actually seen during the day. I started to actually have place a real emphasis and value on what the Senate was doing and particularly what Parliament was doing. And so that actually inspired me later in life to go and run for local government.
So young Henry, he's there, he's watching the Senate.
Very cute.
What about that for you helped you form into what you are today? Like, what about was it the charm of Parliament? Was it the way they were discussing ideas?
Yeah.
What kind of intrigued you into it?
Yeah, so this also fed into why I became a tax lawyer as well. But it was late at night. My mum used to work late when the House sat, and I remember going into the Senate and watching, and there was 2 politicians there. There was no one else in the chamber apart from the president of the House, and they were sitting at the dispatch box talking about a piece of legislation. And it's nothing like Question Time most of the time. So the Question Time antics that go on, it's a big theatre. And that's what people see. And they actually have a very negative view of what politicians do on a day-to-day basis. And they see that aggression. They see people yelling at each other and making a bad impression. But what actually happens 99% of the time is you actually have 2 politicians. And this is what inspired me. There was 2 politicians standing at dispatch box working through some draft legislation, one from Liberal, one from Labor, going through and saying, oh, I don't like this part of it. Can we amend it? And then the other guy going, yeah, I agree with that. Well, what about this? Yeah, I'm happy with that, happy with that, happy with this. What about this section now? We can't agree to this because of that. And then the Liberal Party guy said, well, can we amend it to shape that? And I thought that the way that they actually went through and addressed that legislation to then produce what then becomes law in Australia was incredibly civilised. And that's what Parliament actually is. That's what local government is most of the time. That's not what we see, of course, but that's the crux of it, and that's the actual core job.
Cool. So it was the harmony of these people working together that actually intrigued you.
Yeah, it really was. Even though they're on different sides, both of them were really trying to get the best outcome for Australia. And of course, they disagreed on points, and that's what they would debate in the House the next day. Then tell them the other side's incompetent and that they're messing up Australia and all this kind of stuff. But the crux of it, they were open and honest about what they were going to do as they worked through that piece of legislation. And I think that that's what politics really is, and that's the politics that I don't think Australians see.
So for you, in terms of what type of politician you want to be, what does that look like? Or what did that look like as a young Henry? Because obviously we grow, and when we're younger, we're very passionate. Compared to what you were young and now,
yeah,
what's changed and what have you kept?
Well, it's always been, I suppose I'm a bit strange from this point of view in that a lot of politicians come out with these big sweeping ideas. There's a great instance or a story about how a coach for the English cycling team took them from losing to being the winning team. And it was all about very small increments. So what he did was he tried to make that team better by 1 or 2%. And he looked, rather than trying to double the output of the team overnight with one large change, what he looked at was 1 or 2% increases that then made that team more efficient. And that's what politics really is about making a 1 or 2% change, which are minute details that actually have a massive difference. And it's those kind of details that I think that politicians often miss. They're looking for those big slam dunk moments, and they're not looking about those increment things. And that's the type of politician I am. It's about those details, those 1 or 2%ers that makes a massive difference over people's lives.
Fantastic. So moving into you getting into the Burnside Council, how did you implement this type of philosophy into your politics? And let's actually go into why did you run for Burnside Council in the first place?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of that incremental change method. So when I moved into McGill, into a townhouse there, and there was an older lady there who was retiring. She was moving out. And so I basically bought a lot of her furniture there. It was lovely, floral and pink and, purple. So the house looked nothing like I would want it. Definitely not a bachelor pad. But it really did serve its purpose, and it got me going early in life. And so there came time when I'd saved up enough money to go and buy the latest in flat pack technology from IKEA, bought all this furniture home, and I wanted to get rid of the old furniture. Right? It wasn't worth anything, but we wanted to move that on. So I called up the council and I said, hey, can you come and collect up this hard rubbish? And they said, no, we only do hard rubbish once a year, and you just missed it. It was like 3 weeks ago, like before I moved in. And I was like, well, how does that help me as a ratepayer when I need this service? I don't just need to dispose of a large amount of stuff once every year. That's good for long-term residents, but it really doesn't suit short-term residents. So one of the changes that I implemented in council was to change our once a year hard rubbish collection to an at-call system. Now, one that's better off for residents. It saved about $350,000 per year on their actual rubbish collection. And that's because people were dumping concrete on the side of our verges. And it also decreased crime within the city as well. So a very small change from one thing to another actually had a massive benefit for the entire city. And that's an example of a small thing you can do that actually does have a long-term lasting benefit. And $300,000 is actually 1% of rates.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because I actually took advantage of that living in the Burnside Council.
A lot of people did. I got a lot of flack for that. I got a lot of flack, I'm going to say. And it was funny.
Great.
Because,
we needed it. Like, it honestly made a difference because we had a situation. So I lived in Burnside in Leabrook. And we had our garage filling up because we had 4 people living in the same house. And we were like, we need hard rubbish. What are we going to do? It's like, you just call this number and organize it.
Oh, right. You got after the change.
Yeah.
See, before that, I actually got so much hate for that.
Really?
And it was a good policy. It was $300,000 a year, which is actually 1% of rates. It's a massive difference. 1% of savings per year. And that's because people were coming from other council areas and dumping rubbish. So they'd take some, but they were dumping rubbish onto our verges. And they're like, oh yeah, but you can, swap, and this kind of big, all the rich people in Burnside are giving away the great furniture. Well, yeah, sure, but it was costing ratepayers a fortune and crime went up. And so I'm really glad that it actually made a difference for you.
We actually almost, 2 seconds away from getting a wood oven pizza, wood oven pizza, but then I saw it, we turned around, it was too late, sorry, he took it from us.
Yeah.
But no, it was fantastic, Shane. So, okay, tell me about your story into getting to actual Burnside Council. So what did that look like? How was the campaign for you? And how did you find success there? Because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are wondering or have interest in becoming a councillor one day.
Yeah.
So I guess hearing your story about how you did it would be a tremendous help.
Well, I had a mentor, and I seek mentors through life, and they suggested that I actually run and consider putting my hand up for council. I was obviously very passionate about local issues, and this one in particular, I actually, complained about and talked to them about it. And so I just put my nomination form in, and the previous councillor, Tony Pocock, was resigning, and he wasn't standing again. So I was actually elected unopposed, or I like to say undefeated, in my first election. So I actually didn't have a first election the first time around. Which was an easy way to get in politics, actually. So it just shows you that you got to be in it to win it. You put up your hand, and all of a sudden, you might go there without a fight. And it's terrifying, actually, running a campaign.
Yeah.
Like, people, it's objectively, you've got 8,000 people who are going to look at you and determine whether you're good enough for them.
Yeah.
And that can be terrifying. And so the advice is, I would say, is put your hand up. And who Henry was at 24 is very different than who he is now.
So at 24 years old, what made you think that being Burnside Council would be the first step you would take? Because obviously you have a deep desire, political desire inside you, and you have a deep care for the people of Adelaide and possibly of all of Australia, from what I'm assuming. Why at 24? Why at that age where you're like, I want to be a councillor? Is it just because you saw issues and you thought you could make a difference? Or did you see this as a move for you to make to get into the enrolment of what it like?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there's a bit of a story to this. So I went and did my GDLP, which is a graduate diploma in legal practice. And they gave us this task. They gave us this task where we had to rank 10 survival items in terms of their usefulness in a survival situation. Now, I've been to combat survival course with the Air Force and run away from the army and gotten chased by dog teams and everything like that. I'm actually an expert in survival, and I'd basically just come out of the Air Force and done this when I was doing my GDLP. So I was ranking these items, and they got us to do it individually. Then what they did was they got us into a group, and we had to then rank those items as a group. And I remember that there was another member of my group who clearly, in my view, had never been outside before, was definitely not prone to survival situations, and had zero to no knowledge on what it meant to be in a survival situation. So we filled out the group. I argued with them at length and had a massive fight with them, and I thought they were idiots. And I tried to discount them, and I basically abandoned their view. To my surprise, well, not really, when they nominated the individual scores, I got the highest score, right? But when they nominated the group scores, my group score was higher. And we won both of those things. So even though I was the most competent and the most skill in survival, me in a group with a variety of opinions is actually stronger than me just by myself. And that hit home. And that's been a lesson I've taken with me for my entire life. So now looking at Burnside Council as a 24-year-old, I said, there are no other young people. There's no people who are university students. And people who have this frame of mind. And so I thought that even though I don't have a significant amount of experience at that stage, that I could still contribute. And so I could still contribute to that group and still advance it forward, because I have a new way or a different way of perceiving the world. And collectively, and this is why we have joint decision making, collectively we can deliver better outcomes for Burnside. And that's why I thought I was qualified to put up my hand. It's actually my non-qualifications are qualifications. And I actually think a lot of boards, particularly large companies, would really benefit from, say, someone who's younger with a clean slate, who's sitting there going, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And questioning everything that those large companies do would have a massive improvement on their outcomes.
So it's almost like you're saying the naivety of you being youthful is almost a secret weapon. Yeah,
it really is, because, and this is, we talk about it with new generations. And my generation was Facebook and Bebo and eventually Facebook. Twitter was basically my cutoff for learning things. So I don't do Twitter really. I don't do TikTok, or is that what it's called? TokTik?
Yeah, TikTok.
So I don't do that. You're the one who's saying, do you check my post on Instagram? Oh, just better get on Instagram. But I feel like an old person. You really do have a window when where you're learning and evolving new techniques, and then you stop learning. And that's okay. You know what? Because you're actually honing a craft, you're becoming a specialist, and I'm a specialist in tax law. And so you're then becoming more and more refined in those things. Whereas someone who's fresh has new ideas and a new perspective on life, and they're always questioning why. And you do need that on council, and you do need that in decision-making bodies.
Wonderful. So let's go into your impact of the military. So you mentioned that you had some military experience there. How did that affect your way of being in terms of politics? Did you feel like the military gave you a great foundation to build upon in sense of being a political figure?
The military instilled in me self-discipline more than anything else, and grit, and a whole lot of resilience, and a whole lot of determination. So combat survival course was quite easily the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. We would be run up Castle Hill in Townsville, pretty much every single morning. It was over a 3-week period, and then it culminated in no food for a period of 7 days. And then it culminated, and so we basically went and did an island phase, so we had to build signal fires. Then we did desert, where I was teleporting. I was so dehydrated. I had no short-term memory recollection, and I was seriously dehydrated. Then jungle, where I was being, attacked by leeches on a regular basis, and then I was being chased by the army. And so that type of experience, if I can make it through that, well, then I can make it through a little bit of criticism on council. And so that grit and determination to achieve an objective, and thinking about things and pursuing them relentlessly, I suppose, just taking that next step, just keeping going, is one of the biggest barriers, I think, to people being successful in politics, because it's incredibly difficult.
Yes, and I can feel like for a lot of young people who maybe are in the military or coming out of the military, maybe this would be a great conversation with her here, because there would be opportunity there, because there is such a discipline in the military and so many opportunities and avenues to go down.
I was also a challenger.
Yep.
So when my corporals would say you should do this, I was like, I don't think that's the best option, actually. I think, why don't we do it this way? I gave my corporals and sergeants a lot of feedback, which they didn't appreciate. And obviously they wouldn't, if the question is, let's go charge that machine gun. And I'm sitting there going, maybe we shouldn't charge that machine gun. Maybe we should do something different, like call in an artillery strike or something. That wasn't appreciated at the time. So I was a bit of a challenger. And so I think I kept that throughout. I've always been a leader. I've always been in a leadership position since the age of 6, really, through rowing, growing up in Canberra. But they did teach me that grit and determination. In the end, I got airsick, and I was on the Orion, so I was hunting submarines. So yeah, those who didn't go well.
Can't be
airsick and hunting submarines in an aircraft didn't go really hand in hand.
So, okay, going back to the qualities you kept as your youthful stages, right? Your very passionate stage when you first started out. What have you kept and what have you got rid of?
I've always seemed to have an abundance of energy.
Yep.
I think that's something. It does seem somewhat unique, I suppose. I've always been incredibly curious as a child, but overly curious, and to the extent that I'll get in a lot of trouble. But I've always had this kind of overwhelming ability to generate energy, I suppose, and actually go and achieve something and pursue that, which seems to me, and my mum actually gave me a book, I suppose, when I was little. She said that, there are 3 qualities. She says, what will make you successful, and intelligence, raw intelligence is one of them. Then you have your opportunities and your resources that are around you. And then 3, your dogged determination. And so if you don't have determination, it's essentially, each of those factors are multiplied by each other. So if your determination is 0, doesn't matter how intelligent you are, doesn't how many resources you have, you won't succeed. And to me, I feel that my biggest quality is my determination to achieve an effect or an outcome.
Okay, so going into determination, being in the Burnside Council, how long were you in the Burnside Council for?
8 years.
So 8 years is a long time, almost a decade. So what kind of achievements and takeaways did you have in your time in the Burnside Council? So
my biggest achievement, and the one I'm most proud of, and the one that was most valuable, was the Kensington Gardens Master Plan. So Kensington Gardens Reserve has 5 different clubs on it. It has wetlands. It has passive recreation like dog walking. It has car parking on it. And it also has significant watercourses going through it. So this area of land is very prominent within the area, and there'd be thousands of people visiting it on a weekend. And there were 5 clubs on the Oval. Now, all of their club rooms, and they were based out of 3 different club rooms. And there's also the knitters who meet in the rotunda, which is amazing. So they sit there and knit. It's really cool. So it's a beautiful area of the world. But all their clubs rooms were degrading, and I saw that they'd reached the end of their useful life, and council needed a plan to refurbish them. Now, it started off. And the way to do that in the best way, and this is something that Adelaide Council need to do as well, that they're not doing at the moment, is that we developed a master plan, got the clubs involved, got to a plan and a stage where everyone was happy. That took a number of years, and not everyone was happy at the same time. I remember there was negative press about the proposals. We were looking at a single hub proposal. That's what I was looking at initially. And then we went to a multi-use facility. Now, once we had that master plan, that then got put into the long-term financial plan, and then we could seek state and federal funding for it. And what that resulted in is massive for South Australia. Actually, for South Australia, what I was able to achieve there, because there is this huge amount of sediment that comes down from the hills, from Boral, from White Rock Quarry now, and the rest of the hills face zone. And that silt basically flows straight into the Torrens. So we've actually now constructed a wetlands which will be able to deal with the enriched water that trickles through. Now, in a severe storm event, it goes straight through, bypasses it, but it's able to process and remove nutrients by having reeds and shrubs. And there's something like 10,000, 12,000 shrubs in this wetland precinct now that actually absorbs those nutrients and actually makes a massive difference to the health of the Torrens. That also means that we have the cricket and rugby club, which are able to get brand new facilities, and that's being funded and its construction started. And there's also now a plan to refurbish the other areas as well. And so it's a massive change for my community. That's the thing that I'm most proud of. But of course, there's other massive projects as well.
So what did that mean to your community when you announced this, or when the motions happened and everything was on its ground and happening?
Yeah.
What was the reaction like? What were the people like? And what was it like for you? What was your experience of hearing the community's reaction to this project?
Yeah. So for me, it was overwhelming that you'd actually achieve something. For the club captains, when they realized that we'd now delivered, not just created the master plan and had a pretty picture, but actually delivered on that outcome, those club representatives were overwhelmed, and it made a massive club, and they can see that for their future. But for the rest of the community, not that connected. Like, you don't get this kind of because that's what you're supposed to be doing, right? As a politician, you're supposed to be delivering these outcomes, and if you don't, get out. And so the reaction from your community is not overwhelming support. It's actually you don't get that feedback. But I know what impact that will have. I won't get recognized for it. There might be a plaque. Actually, there won't be a plaque, because by the time it's opened, there'll be another council for the cricket and rugby club. So I probably won't even get acknowledged for it. But I was the one, together with Councillor Piggott, that made that happen, put the master plan together, got the funding, we were able to put in those requests through the administration and deliver this outcome that will last for 25 years. And what you get back from the community is almost nil, but it's all worth it. You know, it's all worth it in my opinion.
So it's quite a Taoistic way to look at it. How did you come to this understanding? Like, what did you do for yourself to be a leader, right? You'll do things for the community, or do things for your people that may not ever be recognized, but you know in your heart that you've made a difference. How did people deal with that? Like, not a lot of people want to do that. Not a lot of people want to do things and not be recognized for it. How can you, as a politician, as a public figure, be okay with that? Yeah,
in fact, you'll actually be hated for it. So all politicians, I think it was Paul Keating said, when he called Julia Gillard when she just got kicked out of politics. Sorry. Even Paul Keating, when he called Julia Gillard when she'd just been removed as Prime Minister, I'm pretty sure he said something along the lines of, "We all leave here in a box." And the idea is that as a politician, eventually you will be hated, because every time you do something, more and more people hate you. And you know what? That's okay. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I believe you have one life. And one of the virtues that the Air Force distilled in me was that if you see a problem, you fix it. Because if you see something lying on the ground that shouldn't be there, or if you see like a magazine or a document flying around, that might have information that will hurt you later on. So if you see a problem, it's your responsibility to fix it. And I saw problems on Burnside City Council. I saw problems with the hard rubbish. I saw problems with the way that Kensington Gardens Reserve was being managed. And once I see that problem, I've always taken the view that it's my job to fix it. And so I would potentially look at running for federal parliament, because I can see massive problems with our taxation system and I know how to fix it. And that's why I would go and do it, because it's my responsibility to do it. Because who else is it? It's not somebody else's. It's not the next person that sees the issue to fix it. It's yours. So going into that, what is your calling? So what is your calling as a politician, and who are you to the world, or who are you to Australia? Yeah, you know what? If I could make a 1 or 2% difference to people's lives, that would be huge. Because who am I to the world? Like nothing. Somebody so insignificant that I'll be forgotten, and then that'll be it. But it's like a tree. I see society as we grow like a tree, and every single ring supports the next. And some of them, the core might die eventually, but that supports the growth of the tree. And you don't get to see it anymore. It gets lost within its history. Somebody might look back and cut it open and count the number of rings, but essentially become insignificant. But every time, I think we as humanity, or we as a society, I think everyone shares this. Everyone shares this as they want to make a small difference and make things slightly better. And then that's what they get purpose out of their life. And they want to have better kids, or they want to invest in that, or they want to make a difference through the local community or through giving back through charity. And so for me, I'm no different from anybody else in that respect. I just feel that the way that I can make that improvement is by applying my skills and my passion through politics. But everyone has that same core desire, I think. And I'm just doing it a slightly different way.
So in advancing into that, what possibilities do you bring as a councillor, not only for Burnside, but potentially for the city of Adelaide? What are your possibilities?
Like more specifically, like what are my policies, or what do I want to fundamentally change?
You as a figure, what makes you different to who's in there right now, and why would people vote for you?
Yeah, so this is the interesting. I want to go back to that story about where people contribute as a group. And so I believe that I can contribute to the joint decision making of council. See, if I individually was a dictator, I don't think that I could deliver a better outcome than a council of elected representatives. And that's the way that makes a better outcome. So what I see myself as being able to do is to be able to question the status quo, to look at things in detail, and to actually contribute to joint decision making. Now, that might not sound flashy, right? Most people want to claim that they're some, savior sent from God, or that they're going to save the world and do this thing. Actually, you know what? That's not going to deliver great outcomes, because those voices are often those extreme voices saying, I'm going to do all this. And you kind of have to do that. You have to promise all this stuff to your electorate. But that's actually not what really delivers outcomes. It's those tiny changes, legislative reform, the boring details about policy and their implementation that makes a massive difference.
Interesting.
And that's what I'm going to contribute. And it's not flashy, it's not big. I do have a range of policies that I am standing for, things that I believe need to be fixed, but that the devil is in the detail.
Let's go into your policies. So
sure.
Obviously you're running for city council, running for South Ward. What policies do you bring for the city, in particular South Ward? Yep. And what differences or possibilities we create incrementally for your you being elected?
So I suppose there's different areas. So the parklands, rates, and smart city technology, and say culture. So those are, I'd say, were my four big categories. So I'd like to go through each of them if we could.
Yeah, let's start with rates.
Let's start with rates. Okay.
Rates is an interesting one, because a lot of there's like a lot of confusion behind rates.
Yep.
Not a lot of people understand them correctly. Yep. And the people that do understand rates have full advantage of the rates. They make good use of it. So
yeah.
Why is that important?
Okay, so rates is fundamentally the most important thing. Same thing with tax. I'm a tax lawyer, and the way that a government raises revenue is what then allows them to do everything. It also allows them to change behaviour. Now, on the Adelaide City Council, they have a different rating policy from all the other suburban councils, which is, in my view, plain wrong. All right. So the Adelaide City Council have an annual value method, which means that the rates you pay is based on the value that the property that you own can generate. So it's the value of the rentable income that the property can generate. What that means is that every single year, if the value of the ability to generate rates goes up, so do your council rates. If you invest in your property, your rates go up, which is a massive blocker to development and also improving your own property. So if you improve things, your council rates go up. You get penalized for it. So it is a way of rating that imposes a penalty on residents. I want to change that. So what council should be doing is they should be setting a budget saying we need X dollars in order to deliver these services, which goes out in the annual general plan to their residents. And they say, these are all the services we're going to provide. Do you want more? Okay, well, we need more money. But they decide on what their budget is going to be. Then they decide how to break that money out across the ratepayers. Generally, the way that that's done is by looking at the valuer general's value of properties and then distributing that based on the valuation of the property, also with a minimum cap. Okay, that's how the suburban councils do it. The way that Adelaide City Council does it, I believe, leads to properties becoming degraded, and it leads to and encourages land banking. Because if your property is derelict and cannot derive rates and cannot derive income, you are incentivized to do that. Landlords who maintain and develop and improve their land are penalized for that. And it's like payroll tax.
It's counterproductive. So what are the intentions of the current system we have? What were the pure intentions, or is it just
it's just a different method.
Yeah.
It's just going back just like the hard rubbish collection.
Yeah.
The way that Adelaide City Council raised their rates is just a way of doing it. And I believe that by changing that method, it would deliver a massive improvement to the way that we collect rates, and also to the methodology and the thought process of councillors and the administration. Because if you're saying these are all the services that we are going to deliver and this is how much money we get in, then you're going to make sure that every single dollar that you earn is set. And then you increase your rates every year based on what additional services you want to do. So you have to be very careful because your residents might penalize you for that. And secondly, it's open and transparent. Whereas at the moment, if the Valuer General increases the value of all properties in South Australia by 10%, suddenly the Adelaide City Council gets an extra 10% of rates revenue. That's not right. That's not right, because what it means then is you have a massive creep in the amount of services that get delivered or the size of the administration. And to me, that leads to inefficiency.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to do a visualization exercise for the residents of Adelaide, the city of Adelaide. If you could have your way in terms of rates and make this change, what could they see for themselves? How would their life?
Nothing.
They would not see anything.
They would not see a difference.
Okay.
You would not be able to visualize, or I could not show you what that would be. Because, but what they would have is a more efficient council. They would have an administration that is more focused on setting budgets rather than looking at raising rates from through the Valuer General. And so those dollars, in my view, get spent a lot more wisely in my suggested rating policy rather than the other one. And so they would not openly see it. But over time, I believe that would deliver a massive increase in the benefit and the quality of life of Adelaide City residents.
Wonderful.
But they would not be able to perceive it.
Okay, let's go to something that you can see, the parklands.
Yeah.
A very unique part of the city of Adelaide, largest parklands in the world for a city.
So our parklands are globally unique. Adelaide City is the only city in the world that is built within a park. And so I'm a member of the Adelaide Parklands Association, and I'm fighting to protect them with everything I've got. And the thing is that every single time, if you see open and developable space, the first idea is let's go and put something on it. Let's activate it. Let's make use of it. Our parklands should be seen as a national treasure, and actually having World Heritage listing over them is a massive priority for me. And I actually do know that the current mayor, Sandy Verschaw, is working on that. And also Rex Patrick, the other contender for mayor, is also making that a priority. Everyone can see that this is a priority. But it does seem that state governments in particular, Liberal governments and Labor governments, are continually looking at ways to erode the parklands and build on them. And we've lost hundreds of hectares since Colonel Light established them initially. So everything that I want to do is to make sure that we protect what's there and actually go back and restore it. Further on, I can also tell you a positive thing that I do want to do it, because it doesn't just mean no development of the parklands. Yeah.
I could envision, like on a personal level, if I could have my way with the parklands, I'd love to see it transform into almost like a big botanics. The entire thing just be this luscious Australian forest. Yeah. The whole thing. Well, and obviously retain the sporting areas.
Yeah.
But visualizing that, like an actual zoo around the city. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but do you think there's a possibility of restoring the vegetation to its natural way before we, tore it all down?
I believe it was actually a plane. But what we can do, if you take the model of Central Park, that is a world icon. That is a world treasured thing. And if you're going to put a building in the middle of it, you'd have the entirety of New York going crazy about that. We don't have that same level of passion in Adelaide. We do from a select group of people, but I just don't think we value what we've got there in the parklands. And so what you're talking about is creating say, botanical gardens around the entire thing and making this a world icon. Imagine that. Like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were a world icon and something that every child knows about. There is absolutely a possibility that we uplift our parklands, that we protect it. We could expand the botanical gardens, something I'd love to see, and make this a showcase of what future living should look like in connection with nature.
So on a climate change discussion, obviously climate change is a big important part of the youth right now and what we care about. What do these parklands bring into the conversation of climate change? Do they make a difference?
From a removing carbon from the atmosphere, no, they don't. On a percentage, kind of level. So if you wanted to remove carbon by planting trees, you'd be much better off going to an open field and planting a whole bunch of gum trees, right? Rather than putting a whole bunch of money and infrastructure into creating beautiful botanic gardens. What they what they do is to actually reduce the temperature of the Adelaide city generally. And that reduces the amount that you spend on air conditioning. It actually also has other impacts on mental health and being able to go and escape to parklands, particularly if you're a resident living in an apartment, being able to, I live in an apartment myself and I go down to the Japanese garden and I love listening to they've got a little piece of bamboo that fills up with water and every now and again smacks a rock. And just sitting there and enjoying that green space has a massive impact, and I feel recharged and I feel good about that. And so what the parklands mean from an environmental perspective is lower temperatures within the city. It provides us with a cleaning mechanism and allows us access to nature, which was Colonel Light's original vision.
Yeah, so I could say, like, for example, the Japanese gardens you mentioned and New York Central Park, such iconic areas, such iconic places, but both of them. Could you see the possibility of the parklands having multiple features like the Japanese gardens throughout the whole thing?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We could actually turn this, and this is what we need is a master plan. So we need a master plan for the parklands, which actually puts on the table all of those ideas. And one of those ideas is the idea of an Adelaide recreation circuit, which is bridges or underpasses around every single road, creating a ring route around Adelaide and connecting all of those parklands. And just from a symbolic point of view, I think as a resident or someone who isn't a resident who comes into Adelaide City can do a bike lap of the city, and parents might do that with their children when they get a little bit older. They then start to value this as a rite of passage to being someone who's from Adelaide. And in that way, I think we would elevate the parklands, because at the moment you think about some of it and they're derelict and kind of run down, or they're a car park and we're not making use of it. We absolutely could transform them. That's what the master planning process would be, is to put that out for community consultation, have consultants coming in, looking at what the possibilities are, but also balancing sport, balancing people's active use of it, and also that passive recreation like we do with the botanical gardens, and events like the Fringe or WOMAD or things like that. And putting those ideas as a collective space, putting in infrastructure, for example, to actually support events like the Fringe to make them cheaper to operate, would be a massive thing for Adelaide, a great thing for Adelaide.
So I guess going to the culture, the parklands obviously could be a larger part of the culture of Adelaide, from what I'm hearing, and we're missing out on this huge opportunity. What else?
Like you have a bush doof in the middle of the city.
Oh, yeah, we could. There's a city in Germany called Munster,
yeah,
and basically what you've just spoke of, they have that there. They have a huge city ring route around the entire city.
Yeah,
and the entire city now it's like 90% of residents only use bicycles.
Yeah,
and the city's about the same size of Adelaide.
That's right. Yeah.
So I mean,
cycling is bloody dangerous at the best of times, and we've actually eroded that. And I think the way that we're approaching our cycling strategy is pretty poor. Even in Burnside, right, we've abandoned our cycling strategy. Because the rate of people cycling was declining. In my view, if you actually had a ring route like that I was talking about, you can easily get from Unley to, if you work in North Adelaide, you can ride around the outside of the city. You don't now have to go through the middle of it. You don't have to cross roads anymore. That would be massive for cycling. And so everyone coming into the city from whichever district they're coming in, on their morning ride to work, gets into a safe environment where they can ride around the outside and get to where they are. Wouldn't that be an awesome thing? And I think that would massively encourage active living and encourage cycling around the city. And that's one of those changes that I think looks small, putting in tunnels and overpasses, but actually, it would be a massive win for our community.
So let's visualize. Sorry, let's have a vision here. You win city council. You're in the South Ward. What are the challenges you face?
Yeah, I've got some immediate challenges in terms of crime within near the box factory.
Yep.
So there's currently a significant amount of vacancies within that small precinct. I've already spoken with residents about it. And look, these are things that are hard because it's about community housing and actually vacancy. So there's a huge amount of squatting and damage which is coming in to that area. And I've had a number of concerns from residents. And how do you fix something like that? Well, that takes a coordination between local government. I know that the local government, Adelaide City Council, is currently using security officers to patrol that area, but it's not effective. And state government, and often state government and council, they don't actually work that well together. To be honest, doesn't matter which government it is, they're not that linked in. So the first thing that I'd like to do in that particular area, I think this will be one of the largest challenges to overcome immediately, is to do a consultation with all the residents around there, get some facts, get their anecdotal stories, and then go to the minister and put that to them and say, look, we've got some serious issues here, and ask the administration to come up with some solutions, because you're dealing with issues of mental health, you're dealing with homelessness, and you're also dealing with local residents who live there, and that is not an easy thing to solve, and it's incredibly challenging.
Yeah, especially in these times.
And I think anybody who says that it's going to come in and solve homelessness just doesn't understand it.
Yeah, no, 100% agree with you on that. And I guess, what are the challenges that, obviously that one's going to be a tough one, but what are the challenges that you look forward to facing? Like you want to
tax policy,
Yep.
Rating policy that's going to be amazing. Actually, something else I'm incredibly passionate about is smart city technology. And it's kind of one of those things where you're waiting for this technology to develop, but it's about interconnecting a city, creating Internet of Things. So I'll give you a simple example. You've got a bin and you can put underneath it a sensor which measures how much rubbish is in the bin. So let's just imagine that bin is in a park. So when the bin gets filled up, the rubbish truck comes and fills it up. So first of all, that means that when the bin gets full, say during springtime, that the council's rubbish collection routes don't need to change or become more frequent. It's just on an as needed basis. So you're now not wasting council time. Second of all, if it's full and it's remaining full, you now don't have rubbish strewn across and blown across the parklands, which then requires a whole bunch of people to then more resources to go and pick it up. Thirdly, you can then have correlative data. So data that correlates from a bin being full to other things. So it could be the case that a bin that gets full, say 20 times, means the gas tanks at the barbecue are now being close to empty. So go and check that. So these data, this amounts of data start to correlate with each other. And it could also talk about parking and further afield. And that type of technology, once you start connecting things, can make a huge difference to a community. And we're talking about smart traffic lights, we're talking about smart lighting, smart rubbish collection, and even sensors, for example, in parklands. So when if it's just rained and the water and the soil is wet, then you don't need to turn the sprinklers on and waste a whole bunch of water. But if it's dry, you can actually calculate what plants are in the area, whether they like being dry, whether they are resistant, or whether there's, say, gum trees that you know that after, say, 2 weeks of no rain, they have an increased chance of dropping limbs from water stress. So you can actually make a huge difference in protecting our older trees by now putting in sensors that can then manage water flow and look after them better. And the outcomes that you can produce from that are massive.
So that sounds very promising. And when you hear the word smart city, a lot of fear for some people is the lack of, or the loss of privacy. But from what it sounds like from your point of view and what you want to propose is
what's things?
Just sensors that can actually gather data, not necessarily survey. It's not a surveillance thing. It's a sensor thing.
Yeah, it's a sensor. It's getting data on to provide better services,
which is what I think needs to be communicated a lot better to the people, because obviously no one wants to be filmed all the time.
Yeah.
But having sensors that can pick up levels of rubbish and gather data. The thing is, like if there's a particular spot's got a lot more rubbish, then that's a great way for the council to show how we need to increase the capacity of bin sizes here or something. There's so much opportunity there. So what other things besides the smart city? So we talked about rates, talked about smart city technology, we talked about parklands, we touched on culture and transport and the challenges of council. What for you, and what does it mean to you if you did get city council? What would that mean for you? Can I
go a bit more fundamentally?
Yep.
All right. A little bit more fundamentally, I don't want to be negative about Adelaide and the way that we look at look at ourselves, but I do feel to an extent that we are somewhat pessimistic about our future. Now, as a tax lawyer, I actually work with hundreds of businesses and a whole bunch of accountants, and I look at the way that business owners judge their ability for their companies to succeed, and then say actually open manufacturing businesses within South Australia. And a lot of the time, many of the conversations go, well, I guess I'll move to Sydney, Melbourne to expand my product, rather than say, or they just say, you know, I'm big enough and I don't want to expand anymore. Or it does seem to me that there is a cap, I suppose, on the ambition there. And I think that in many ways stems from people coming to Adelaide and you say, hey, what should I do? And you go, there's nothing to do in Adelaide. And that seems a lot of the rhetoric is that it's sleepy old Adelaide. Even the hilltop hoods that I love, you know, they call Adelaide a city that's stuck in time. And that's actually amazing because Adelaide is a beautiful city that I love to live in. But I also want to make sure that our young people, and we've got this brain drain at the moment going to New South Wales and Victoria, I want to make sure that they have the opportunities that are here. And I've definitely seen that happening with the space station, and there's a lot of excitement around Lot 14. But we can continue that as a society, and particularly on council. I want to encourage people and support them and give them that sense that there is a future here for people who want to grow their career, who are ambitious, and who want to build large companies or be a part of larger companies. I mean, out of 200 ASX listed companies, I think we have 6, right? And that means that we don't have those professional jobs. And they go to Sydney and Melbourne. And can I say that one of the biggest issues that Adelaide has is with super funds. So everyone here in South Australia, 1.6 million people, are paying 10%, let's just say, of their wage towards their super. That super gets invested on the eastern states. It doesn't get invested here. And if I was in state government or had control over this, then that's something that I would be pushing for. But that level of investment, we're all basically giving away 10% or putting away 10% of our wage, which then gets invested in somebody else's backyard. That's outrageous. Super funds should be investing in South Australia, in developments here, which actually deliver outcomes, right? And they're investing in things like companies, tech companies that are startups or are increasing their services or manufacturing. And we're not seeing that. And I think that really does hurt our ability to retain our young talent.